At first, it seems pretty simple to cut with a sword. I mean, all you have to do is put it over your head, cut down, and you've got it. Well, actually, it's a little more complicated than that. It's kind of like me saying, well, I'm gonna play the violin, so if I put it under my chin, hold it out here, pull the bow across, and it makes some noise, then I'm playing the violin. Well, actually, it's more complicated than that to cut with a Japanese sword. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go through the fundamental principles of cutting with a sword that you can apply to pretty much any sword style out there, Aikido, Kenjutsu, Aikido. Take these principles and you can apply those to each different style depending on which one you're going to take. Okay, before I show you the individual skills, I want to go over the goals. What's the goal of a good sword cut? Well, number one, you want to have a slicing action instead of a chopping action. Because if I just bring it down, I'm going to hit, just a chop on on whatever you're trying to cut, you're going to chop down in there. It's like if I have a tomato and I put the sword down on there and I just push, it's going to dent, even if it's real sharp, it's going to dent before it then cuts through. But if I take a tomato and I lay the sword on there and I just pull just a little bit, it'll cut right through. So you want to have a slicing action instead of a chopping action. So that's the number one thing you want to do. So the second goal is utilizing your hips to generate your power and not your upper body, because it's really easy to generate your upper body, throw it forward, and then the force of throwing your shoulders forward, you throw your weapon forward, okay? And then you have to deal with a lot of compensation. It's really hard on your elbows, your shoulders, your body to do that. So the second principle is to show generating the power from the ground and then putting that power of the hip pressure, moving the hips back and forth to move the weapon, as well as gravity pressing down to press power into your weapon so you can keep your upper body relaxed and natural while you're doing the sword cuts or any type of the sword movements. Before I show you the first skill involved in cutting with a sword, I want to kind of give you an overview of what we're going to cover. The first thing we're going to cover is the wrist, how the squeezing of the wrist, the gripping of the sword, and the movement of the wrist itself in generating the cut. The second principle is going to be the elbow position, the elbow movement, the ergonomics of the elbow and the shoulder, so that you're not pulling and tensing up while you're cutting. You can actually get a relaxed cut and actually bring the energy from the low body into your upper body, into the weapon, through proper elbow and shoulder movements. Okay, the last two principles took me years to learn, so I think they're the most difficult to get those skills, and that is using your hips to move your weapon. Now, on a basic level, it's easy to hold my hips locked solid, and then I move move my arms up and down. What's harder is to get my hips to move this weapon, whether you're using a naginata, yari, sword, whatever, to get your hips to move and generate the power to bring your weapon towards you or away from you or a cut or whatnot. So that's the most difficult, or one of the most difficult, is using the hips. Okay, and the most difficult skill of all is going to be the last one that we go over, and that is using gravity, dropping of gravity, and stance control to actually add the power into the weapon. So that's going to be the most difficult to discuss and show on video, is using gravity and your stance to actually generate the power to move into the weapon. And once all of those things are working together, then you've got a natural, efficient, and powerfully relaxed sword cut. Okay, when you first pick up a sword, the tendency is to use my lats to pull down the sword like this, and then everything stays locked, and then we just move like this. Okay, so what I'm going to do is show you how to get away from that, because this is a big motion, and it's very inefficient to use these big, powerful muscles to cut with. So what I'm going to do is show you how you can use your wrist to do a lot of the sword cut. Now, if my sword is completely perpendicular to my wrist and I squeeze, nothing's going to happen to the sword, okay? So what I want to do is if I just put my wrist out just a little bit at an angle to my sword, now watch what happens when I grip. Just this little motion of gripping, watch what happens to the weapon. See how the weapon moves just from that little motion? And then as I grip, then I can add wrist motion in there as well and get more reaction out of my weapon than just using this big muscle. So the first exercise is just, let your hand open and figure out where do I need to put my sword in relation to when I grip and cut, my sword goes out, okay? Okay, so once you get that down, then you can bring the sword away a little bit and learn to use your grip, squeezing a little harder and let it out and try to stop it at the end. So you're squeezing. It's just like a punch. So instead of tightening your fist and punching and pulling all your energy back to you, this is like squeeze into the punch. Okay, so actually a karate teacher taught me how to do this. So squeezing into the punch, okay, so that's what you want to do. You want to squeeze, and then it will stop the weapon really quick, so it will stop on a dime. It'll just stop immediately. Now the sword might be a little heavy to start squeezing and getting to stop real quickly. So I suggest maybe starting with a bokto or a bokken and doing the same motion with this until you can stop the bokken immediately. So we've got the squeezing and the wrist motion. Now let's talk about how to actually hold the sword. Because what you want to do is you want to hold these two fingers together. And why is that? Well, if I put this in here, these fingers squeezing, so if I want to, squeeze the bottom, I'm going to squeeze the bottom, it's going to go that way. What if I want to bring the sword to me? I'm going to squeeze here. So really, it pivots. These are very strong, so you want to wrap these around and everything pivots in there. The easy way to think about it is like holding these fingers together. It's like you're holding an egg. You're holding an egg between these, so it's more rounded like that. So then you've got the grip to hold on to it, but you've got flexibility in your wrist and in your fingers to do the cut. What I want to do is I want to show some examples of how you can use the grip to move the weapon, and then that takes a lot of pressure off of the rest of your body to generate the power to move this weapon. Okay, what I want to do now is show some universal principles put into maybe different styles. So here with Aikido cut, you're going to have a big arcing, arcs way up, so you can get a big slicing effect. So I'm going to start down here. See how my grip, I'm over-exaggerating this, but the grip is going to make the weapon move. So my grip, and then this is just follow through. So grip, so from here, if I'm going to cut, okay, it's a big arc, but it's a lot to do with the grab. Now I'm going to cut from a different position, and you're going to see less wrist movement, but the wrist movement is still going to be there. So if I'm cutting from this position, okay, if I'm cutting from this position, see I've still got a little bit of a squeeze, okay? And from here I'm going to cut out, okay? So it's just from a different position. Okay, now what I want to do is show more of a thrusting cut than a slicing cut. Okay, so bringing it back. Now watch, same thing here. As I squeeze, see how that's going to start the weapon moving? So from here, squeeze and then pushing out. So here, it's going to be squeeze and push. So you're still getting the squeeze to do the majority of the work in these 3 different examples of a cut. So now what I want to do is show an example of where the squeeze is going to actually help move your weapon. Okay, so I'm going to show without the squeeze first. So if I bring the weapon out, draw it out, bring it above my head, you know, that's one way to do it, but that's not really that efficient because I'm using a lot of excess motion. Okay, now what I want to do is show you how to take a lot of the arm motion out of it and use the squeeze to put the sword above my head, just as an example. So when I bring the sword out, now watch, as I go up, now watch when I squeeze, see how it moves the sword above my head, and then you can just grab and cut. So you take a lot of excess motion out there by squeezing to move the weapon over your head. Now, very popular in Aikido, you're going to squeeze to cut across. Okay, so what I want to do is show how. Okay, so if I use my upper body strength, come out, grab, there's no squeeze, and then I come to here, and then I have to use my wrist maybe and my shoulder to move that weapon all the way across. So what I'm going to do is show you, so if I take that same motion, and then I come out here, as I turn, now see as I squeeze, it's going to put pressure on the blade. So I want to come out first, all the way out, and then watch, as I squeeze my grip, the weapon goes out. Now watch, as I turn my hips, see, I didn't have to use my shoulder at all. It was all squeezing action and hips to make that cut, okay? Okay, so this is part 1, which we just went over the wrist motion and solidified that. In the next video, or part 2, I'm going to go over the shoulder motion and the elbow motion. It's absolutely critical to getting a good slicing cut. And then in the last 2 videos, we're going to go over how to generate power from the ground, gravity in the ground, and move that through your hip rotation into moving the weapon. And we'll show that with different weapons like yari, bojutsu, naginata, and sword. So if you'd like to see future videos on how to use the sword ergonomically, like and subscribe. We definitely appreciate the support, and we look forward to seeing you in the next video. Thank you very much.